This week, I am so excited to bring you my conversation with Josh Bersin. I've been following Josh's work since I was early in my career. He is the CEO of the Josh Bersin Company, an author, an analyst, one of my favorite podcasters, and he's an expert in all things talent, leadership, and HR. We recorded this podcast in his living room, and that is also where he recorded much of the Josh Bersin Academy online, which is an HR training program and community of HR professionals and mentors. It's a great conversation. We talked about company culture. We talked about the work that he's done over his career and how he has seen American business culture change over the decades, and how the advent of social media has reshaped the role of HR, even how investors have changed the way they value companies and what that means long term. We talked about the details of HR, the psychology behind return to office mandates and DEI and ESG and AI, and how critical HR is and how to be more critical. Josh is a wealth of knowledge on pretty much every aspect of business and culture, and I was just such a fangirl. I have been my whole life, and I was so excited to get to meet him in person and have this conversation. I think anyone listening will get a lot out of this. So please welcome to the podcast, Josh Bersin. Josh Bersin, I feel like I'm sitting in the room of a celebrity. This is your living room.
Yes, it is.
This is also where much of Bersin Academy was recorded, I hear.
Quite a bit of things were recorded here.
Okay, so you've been doing this in this room for a long time. I'm so honored that you've invited me here to chat with you about what's going on in the world of HR.
Thank you, Jessica. Nice to meet you.
So my very first question is, what is your why?
Well, I have to say I stumbled into this. So there wasn't really a mission in the beginning. But what I discovered around the late 90s when I started, I really was laid off at a tech company and was always interested in the applications of technology at work. What I found over the last 25 years is that the human resources profession, career, professionals are incredibly important to companies. And many times they're marginalized or left behind or underinvested in. And so my why is I love HR people and I love the HR function. And if I can do more and more and more to help everybody in that profession do a better job, we can help them be successful. We can help their companies be successful. We can help their employees be successful. And that's turned out to be a really wonderful career for me.
But you are a CEO. You're not a head of HR, right? And so you have a unique perspective on the role of HR, perhaps, in driving business results. There's this tension, it feels like, between CEOs and HR. Does HR have a seat at the table yet?
Oh, definitely.
Definitely?
Oh, absolutely. Well, maybe not everywhere.
Okay.
Most of our clients are bigger companies.
Right.
I think the older a company becomes, the more cycles they go through, the more respectful they become of HR. In the early stages of a company, fast-growing companies, they oftentimes think HR is just a big recruiting department.
Right.
And they don't really think about these more complex issues of culture, diversity, pay equity, development, careers. They don't even care. They just say, get more people in the door, you hire the right people, and then you were happy with what you're doing. When the companies go through a downturn or they get disrupted by a competitor, or the CEO retires and the new person isn't performing well, or the product fails, then there's this massive blaming process that goes on where we try to figure out what went wrong. And ultimately what you find out is a lot of it has to do with the people. And all of a sudden, maybe we need to take HR more seriously, and then they bring in different kinds of people into HR. So, I'm completely convinced that every company of every size could probably perform better if they paid more attention to what human resources people do. But every leader goes through their own learning process of getting to know what that means.
And my experience is that every leader thinks they are an expert in what HR does.
Right.
And so they're really there for payroll and regulation compliance, right? How many CEOs have an opinion about talent management, about working from home or not?
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. So I have two thoughts on that. The first is, of course, if you're a successful business person, you're convinced that you know how to manage and hire people well.
Right.
Because you've been successful. And so HR may seem like an afterthought, but what happens, of course, is everybody has blind spots. I've worked in a high growth company. I've never worked in a company that's a turnaround. I've worked in a turnaround. I've never worked in a high growth company. I've worked in a big company. I've never worked in a small company. On and on and on. There's all sorts of situations that a successful leader may not have ever experienced where HR can help them tremendously. And then when you get into scale of a large organization, your individual skills as a leader are not enough. It's building leaders, it's building a culture, it's building an organization that can succeed. So that's the reason that, HR is important, and great CEOs respect and listen to their HR leaders to continuously learn what they need to do. The second issue, though, that I think is an ongoing issue that frustrates me is I think there is a tendency to disrespect HR as a profession. And we see this all the time. And I am not at all negative on the people in HR, but I see this in the work we do, where the amount of money spent on HR is constrained. The company doesn't want to invest in the HR department. They think it's too big. They think it's bureaucratic. They just want to get rid of it. They think about HR as a cost center or a service center. And a lot of our research is really showing people how to move from HR as a cost center to HR as a value creator or a consulting function in the company. And that's an evolution for HR people too, not just for the rest of the company. And maybe this will always be true, but there's always been this tendency, and this was true in companies I worked for, where somebody who wasn't performing well in their sales or marketing or whatever job, they'd say, well, why don't you go work in HR for a while or go do training for a while, since you're obviously not performing well in this, as if that's an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
Which it really isn't. As
Right.
you know, you've done it. So I think a lot of what I try to do is give non-HR people a serious appreciation for how difficult and important this function is, and treat these people with respect, because they're highly trained and very, very knowledgeable about things that we generally, non-HR people, haven't been thinking about all day.
Right. They're thinking about the meta picture, right? And what they're managing seems like it's getting more complicated when you look at the context. So people are working, but we're getting less people. The people's expectations are changing.
Right.
We are changing the dynamic of the employer-employee social contract. And so all of these things are, a simple example is layoffs, right? 30 years ago, a layoff is last resort to save a dying company.
Right.
It must be bad news. Now layoffs are, oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. The stock market loves layoffs, right? So that has significant consequences for employees and how much they contribute in their day-to-day, their engagement levels, their commitment levels, and what HR needs to do accordingly. So can you talk to us about the big picture?
Yeah.
Where we're going as society?
I love talking about society. Well, I'm old enough to have lived in a completely different environment that gives me a little bit of clarity on what happened. So before the internet, before the level of transparency we have in social media, it was very hard to find a job. You literally had to type a resume on a typewriter, print it, edit it with whiteout, put it in an envelope, and mail it to get a job. And you would wait to see if somebody mailed you a letter back or maybe called you, but most likely you got a letter back to set up an interview. That's how bad or slow. I mean, it sounds so odd now to say that. So what happened was, when you got a job, you stuck with it. You had a lot of loyalty to that company, and the company had loyalty to you. And so in the 50s and 60s and 70s, companies weren't getting disrupted as quickly as they were today, and the employment relationship was generally just a more loyal, sticky, lifelong, maybe not your entire career, but for a long period of time. And when you left a company, it was a big deal. It was sometimes risky to leave. People didn't change industries very often. They didn't change job families very often. And
Can I interrupt and ask
Yeah,
a
sure.
clarifying question? What was the incentive at that point for the employer to be loyal to the employee?
well, it was just as hard to hire as it was to look for a job.
Okay, it was hard both directions.
In both, because we didn't have all these systems and this data going back and forth the internet. And I remember when I was at IBM, which I worked at IBM for 10 years, I was planning on working there my whole career. Of course, the company kind of fell apart while I was there. But one of the really senior salespeople I worked with left IBM to work for a bank. And we thought he had dropped off the face of the earth. Why would you leave a computer company to go work for a bank?
It's like a different planet.
But now, people move around between industries and companies constantly. So what happened was sometime around 1998, 1999, when the internet started to pick up speed and companies like Monster.com and CareerBuilder and others realized that recruiting was one of the biggest kind of new markets, we suddenly realized, wow, I can apply for a job in my current job without my boss knowing about it. I don't have to write this letter and wait for people to respond. And this level of transparency, LinkedIn, of course, helped, created a much more empowered workforce that felt capable of looking for a new job and taking it. And of course, the norms changed and it didn't seem bad anymore. It seemed okay. In fact, a lot of companies, when I stayed at Sybase about 2 or 3 years longer than I should have. And I remember a lot of people said to me, your career is going to be ruined if you stay there much longer. Because when the company is starting to decline, if you stay there, all of a sudden your resume looks like, you're the type of person that couldn't get out.
Oh, wow.
So the whole thing changed. And now it's even more dynamic because you can do 2 jobs at once. You can have the main job, and then you can have your side job, and then you can have your influencer job.
Right.
So this relationship between employer and employee is much, much more value on both sides, which means that, laying people off is not really a black mark anymore. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but it's considered to be normal.
Right. And the gig economy is changing everything.
Right. This is another one that sort of crept up on us. People were writing articles about it for a long time. And I think Uber kind of started the concept, but now it's I think the data in the United States, we haven't done good data on it for a while, is that about 1/3 to 40% of Americans have gig work. And that's a lot of people. So there's all these talent marketplaces and gig platforms, and you can be a contractor in marketing, you can be a contractor in design, you can stick stuff on YouTube. So there are so many opportunities for ambitious people to find work that employers kind of have to think really hard about what is our value proposition, what are we really giving people who work here, and is it enough, or is it the right combination? Which leads to a different kind of HR. And like, for example, Jessica, the other thing that's been striking to me over the years, when I was young, you never went to work and said, I'm tired today. I'm burned out. You would never say that. You would put on your coat and tie and you would be a work person.
Right.
And then you'd keep those feelings to yourself.
Here is your work personality.
You did not, because we had a big barrier between work and home.
Right.
Now people say, I'm burned out today. They talk about their dogs and their families and their medical problems and their mental health issues. It's very, very different. So HR has to accommodate this much more interrelated experience we have between work and life that we never had before. So all of these huge things that have changed over the last 20 or 30 years have forced HR to change what it does and to teach leaders that you need to maybe behave a little bit differently with these people that are working in the company.
I have a bone to pick with HR,
Okay.
which I'm allowed to do as a former HR leader. So this bring your whole self to work thing, this authenticity at work, and let's talk about your mental health. HR is at the helm of this mission to allow people to be their full selves. And I think it's putting the cart before the horse, because what it's doing, in my opinion, is having employees expose themselves and their vulnerabilities before leadership and managers, frontline managers in particular, are ready to accept and welcome with open arms the diversity of what exists under the hood, right? So ultimately what you have is people saying, I'm going to bring my whole self to work and this is me, and then managers saying, you're no longer a culture fit, let's get someone else in here. Have you seen that play out?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I don't know. I don't want to blame millennials or Gen Z or Gen
Please
Y.
don't, as a
I mean,
millennial.
but I think younger. I'm older, but I think if I think about my kids and other young people, um, they had the freedom to express themselves publicly in ways that we never had. Putting stuff on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, is common. So you want to be authentic to people you don't know. Of course, you want to be authentic to people you do know. So I think this idea of hiding your personal stuff from work, which I grew up with, just disappeared. It just kind of vanished. Now, I agree with you. I think a lot of people that are very maybe overly transparent at work may suffer because of that. They create an environment where people know a little bit too much about what's on their mind. And, unfortunately, businesses are about business. They're not really about people. I mean, the people are part of it, but there's a profit and business goal, and there's a growth goal, and there's whatever it may be. So, but I think that's just the way it is. I don't try to judge it. We have in our company we know each other very, very well in our company. We spend a lot of time getting to know each other, and it's been a really good thing because we know when somebody's upset or unhappy or they have issues at home, we know we can accommodate that and just work through it. So I actually think it's positive, even though sometimes seems a little bit weird.
But your company is 100% remote.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So you're talking about we get to know each other, we spend time together. There are so many CEOs out there that are saying we got to get back into the office. Amazon, Dell recently made this announcement. Right. 5 days a week, assigned seats, and we're getting rid of management layers. So why are they forcing people back into the office?
I think it depends to some degree on the type of work that people do. We are really intellectual property and consulting work, and we spend a lot of money on meetings. We fly around a lot. We actually see each other a lot, but we just don't do it in an office. We go to meetings, we go out to dinner, we have various events and so forth. Well, I think there's two reasons why people are trying to force people back in the office. One is they're paying for the office, and they want to feel like they're getting some value out of it.
Which is imaginary.
I know, but there's sort of this sunk cost problem of let's use this place we have and bring people together, and supposedly they'll like it.
So we don't, quote, lose the culture.
Right.
Right.
And then there are a lot of decisions and projects that just can't be done online. And I think you probably know this in your company. You can have a 1 hour meeting and it's pretty good. You can have a 2 hour meeting and it's okay. Beyond 2 hours online, you're not going to get that much done. Mm-mm. And if it involves writing on the whiteboard and people discussing and arguing and debating, there's this time delay with Zoom where you don't quite get to interrupt somebody, and it's very, very awkward to go through a real creative process online. So we oftentimes will have a very complex, maybe technology or product strategy thing we're trying to do. And we have a bunch of conference calls and we just say, look, let's talk about this at the next offsite because it's too complicated to get through it here. And I think there's a lot of awareness amongst executives that those kinds of problems are better solved face to face. And I knew your persona from your website. Now I know who you are. I actually know you fairly well, at least, having met you. You don't really get to know somebody that well on Zoom until you meet them. They're taller than you thought. They're shorter than you thought.
Yeah, there's
those are little
in the
things that make a big
there?
difference.
Yeah.
So I can see why. I don't believe mandating people going back to work is really a good idea. Most people have a variety of reasons why they may not want to commute on a given day. They might have kids at home. They want the flexibility. So as long as it's somewhat flexible, I think it's going to be fine.
Okay, so talking about culture, how do you define culture?
I mean, culture to me is the unwritten rules of what we value and reward as an organization. So it's the behaviors and reward systems and patterns of really human conduct that sit underneath of a company. And doing the consulting, I can tell within a few minutes of visiting a company what their culture is like because I do this so much. There are companies that are very hard-nosed, competitive, business-oriented. They don't believe in development and growth. They just believe in execution, execution, execution. People tend to either like that or not like that. And as long as the company's clear that that's their culture, then they won't have a lot of problems because people will want to be in that company if they like that. And I'm not going to mention any company names, but I know a lot of companies like this. Those companies tend to pay a lot of money. You have to work pretty hard and kind of keep up with the whole competitive nature of the culture in the company. But they tend to be very high performing companies. What happens to those kinds of cultures, though, is when things go bad and you do a lot of introspection, there tends to be a lot of blaming. There tends to be a lot of firing when actually there's oftentimes it's a learning problem, it's a capability problem, and you don't like to discuss that. So other cultures are much more developmental and supportive and forgiving. Personally, that's the way I am, and that's the way I've learned, to run our company. And then there are cultures that are very innovative, where it doesn't matter if we do the same thing as our competitors. We want to be better than them. We want to be different than them. There's companies that are very low cost oriented. We want to be the low cost provider. We want to be the value provider. There's companies that are very consultative. There are companies that are very product oriented. There's a lot of dimensions to this that are subtle. And I think most of the cultural values are built early in the company by the founders, the people that built the value proposition of the company in the early days. And they tend to be around a long time, and they're kind of hard to change. Like if I think about Boeing, for example, I was an engineer in college, and I interviewed at Boeing, and everybody loved Boeing. It was a highly respected engineering company. Somewhere in the last 40, 50 years, that culture adapted and changed to something else, more of a financial focused company. And I would be willing to bet that they're up there scrambling around trying to figure out how to get back to that engineering culture. And it's going to take time.
Well, they hired an engineer for the new CEO.
Yeah, that's probably a good sign.
And he said he'd go back to Seattle. So I
Yeah.
think that's indicative too. Speaking of Boeing, they're on strike. I haven't heard anything about them in the last week or two. They made a best and final offer, right? And so we're still waiting to hear what's going on with that. And then you just had the port strike,
Right.
had the hotel strike recently. Unionization efforts seem to be, if you look at the data, it's marginal increase in unionization efforts, but it is appearing in the news more. It seems like people are more activated. Is there something in the air? Are people...
Yeah, it goes back to
revolution?
Activated is the word we use. We call it employee activation. I think there's two things going on with unions. One is, of course, the Biden administration just sort of likes unions, so there's a lot of pro-union, legal support. But generally, if you look, my experience, we don't do a lot of work with union stuff because we're not really lawyers. But generally, what I think happens is when management gets out of touch with the day-to-day life of the line employees, bad things can happen. I know we talk to a lot of retailers, and we've done a lot of studies of a lot of retailers. Being a frontline Starbucks worker, or working in FedEx or Amazon, is a certain type of work that an executive probably assumes about what it is. And if they didn't come from that work themselves, which a lot of them didn't, they don't really know what's going on in the day-to-day life. And the story of Starbucks, which is now being written about, I'm sure there'll be a lot of books on this, was we need more flavors of coffee, we need more food, we need more items, we need more automation, and we want you guys to build this stuff faster so the lines aren't so long. And it all broke down on the employees. And the employees basically have been saying to Starbucks for quite a long time, we can't do this job, it's too complex, the customers aren't happy, the product is not keeping up with the quality we'd like to provide, the experience is not in the stores what we wanted it to be, and the management didn't hear it. I think Howard Schultz heard it, but I'm not sure the other management did, and so they started to unionize. And suddenly, if you look at the congressional testimony by Howard Schultz, he was sort of in shock.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't realize I think if you're close to your frontline employees, you can see these kinds of issues and do something about them. I can't speak to what's going on at Boeing or, the longshoremen at the moment, but, I think once it happens, you're in a different situation. Now you're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. So with Starbucks as an example, I think let's talk about HR consulting, culture consultants, right?
Yeah.
It feels like every consultant,
Like you guys.
right, like us, their whole shtick is we're going to listen to your employees. That's not, I mean, listening it feels fairly straightforward, right?
It's not obvious.
It's not obvious.
It's also
after all
hard.
this time?
I'm sure, I don't know what you guys do. We did a lot of this at Deloitte. It's very hard to really know what is on employees' minds. Surveys don't tell you enough. You have to really go through a process of having, in a sense, a whole bunch of meetings and conversations with people to get a sense of what is it about the company that we like, what is it about the company we don't like, what are the things that are our core that we don't want to lose, what are the things that are our core that we don't want to have anymore. I mean, a lot of times what happens to companies is some of the core values become stale and they need to be abandoned. That's kind of what happened to Bill Gates when Ballmer came in, and that's kind of what happened to Ballmer when Satya Nadella came in, is they had to abandon some of the cultural norms that they had to get to the next level of growth. A CEO can't get all, that's difficult. So you guys as a consulting firm or others add a lot of value in creating these conversations and getting this information out of employees by the way, in a non-threatening form. Most employees, if you ask them, what do you not like about the company, they're a little afraid to say anything.
Right.
Because somebody's going to know their name.
Yeah, because people take feedback personally,
Right.
and
Yeah.
if you don't like me because I told you the truth, well, you're in charge of
And
whether or not
I
get
don't think it's
promotion.
easy for anybody at the top of a large organization to get all that information. You can't get it from one meeting. You can't
No.
get it from one town hall.
I get surprised by how confident CEOs are that they are getting the truth from employees in their company. They feel like, no, but really, I think they're being honest with me. They're giving me real feedback. And I just don't feel that to be the case most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
And one of your jobs as a consultant is to help them understand that what they think they know may not be correct, because everybody has their own blinders on. And when you're at a senior level, people just don't treat you the same way.
Yeah. So as the CEO, you've been the CEO of 2 companies now, right? And you sold your first company to Deloitte. How was the culture shift with that transition? What was that like?
Well, I mean, I've talked about this a lot. I mean, we were a small, very scrappy, innovative, research and advisory company. We weren't very big. We had no capital. We were self-funded, so we never really had a lot of money in the bank. And we were really excited about Deloitte. I mean, Deloitte was a first-class world brand. The fact that they wanted to acquire us and bring us into a very strategic part of their human capital business was a huge, excitement for us. So
Did they call you out of the blue?
No, we were looking for money.
Okay.
We knew we needed something to grow. We either needed money or a partnership of some kind. So they came along. They already knew who we were. We didn't know as much about them as they knew about us. So it was very, very exciting. They took very good care of our people. They gave everybody a raise. They improved the benefits. There were no layoffs. They added a lot of infrastructure and capacity to our company. So they gave us all great jobs. I mean, it was really very positive. The culture change for me personally was I never worked in a consulting firm. So I never really understood the pace and energy needed to be a consultant. I'm really more of an analyst or a researcher or a writer by nature. So I think most of us were surprised at the difficulty it was to do what we did. We were constantly getting involved in sales opportunities and client this and consulting that. And the reason they acquired us was really for our IP and our methodologies. And we had a hard time keeping that going when there was so much activity. And I think all the consulting firms have this problem that in order to grow, they have to constantly find new problems, new clients, new technologies that fuel this appetite for growth and revenue. And because it's a big, expensive company, these companies have a lot of human capital, and these people make a lot of money. So if you're not growing, the company starts to lose money. And so I would say the only challenge to the culture was that for us being more of a product company, we felt like we were getting pulled in many, many different directions. Unfortunately, now the company is gone. I mean, there's no vestige of Bersin left at Deloitte. There's a few people there that have found jobs that they like, but the cultures didn't merge as well as we had hoped. And there were a lot of people supporting us, senior people that really tried to make this succeed. But ultimately, it ended up the way it did. And I learned a lot. I mean, Jessica, I flew all over the world. I met senior people. I got to know these great consultants at Deloitte who were really just great people to work with. It really had a wonderful period of time for 6 or 7 years while I was there.
I've heard you talk about the focus of the CEO has shifted from profitability to growth, and it bothers you. Can you talk about that? That's fascinating.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, so if you're a publicly traded company or if you have investors, there's this, and look at OpenAI, for example. Everything is what your company's valued at. What's going to get the stock price up? And what the investors want is growth, market share, and maybe some profitability. Right now, they don't care about profitability so much. And when I was a young guy, P/E ratios were much lower. And if you weren't making a profit, the value of your company was zero. Well, now nobody cares. As long as you're growing, winning over the market, blitz scaling, then you're worth a lot of money. That's a different way of valuing a company. And I think Amazon kind of taught the stock market that growth was more important than profits. I'm not sure anybody was really talking about it until Jeff Bezos did, and he did a pretty good job of convincing people that under the right conditions this works out. By the way, there are a lot of high growth companies that fizzle out too, and have ultimately get disrupted. So unfortunately, no matter what if you're publicly traded, if you're private like us, you don't care.
Right.
Like we grow as fast as we need to. We don't grow for the sake of growing. We want to make a profit. But so there's this pressure to keep the stock price up. So of course, you go from your core value proposition, your product, your service that made you successful, and you extend. You build new features, you build new products, you go into new markets. Well, there's a bunch of competitors over here that you didn't know over here. There's a bunch of features and customer needs over here that you didn't know about over here. So every time you do that, you take a little bit of a risk. And, I think Amazon is an example of a company that's done this really, really well, but most companies don't. Most companies, by nature are really good at what they did to get started, and some of the extensions don't work. And so you lay off the people that didn't work. You have a bunch of stranded investment. You have to sell that part of the company off later. And you go through this cycle of what can we do to grow? What can we do to grow? What can we do to grow? The reason I'm sort of negative on that is it's very hard on the employees. It's very hard on the customers, because the customers, I don't want you to grow. I just want you to take care of me. Mm-hmm. I'd like you, I have to laugh. I have these Bonobos clothes that I bought when Bonobos got bought by Walmart. Well, they keep changing them. Well, why do they keep changing them? I like them the way they are. They fit me perfectly. But Nike, I mean, look at what's going on in Nike, trying to do new things all the time. They lost their core. So I think it has some negative implications on the products, the customers, and the employees. I can't fix it because the stock market values company the way it values it. But if you look at value stocks or companies that pay good dividends, if you're an investor, those companies oftentimes don't grow at a breakneck pace. They're thinking about different things. And over long periods of time, sometimes those companies outperform these companies that grow really fast. That's the problem I have with it. Now, from a human capital standpoint, the, the dysfunction that's created when you try to grow fast all the time is you hire too fast, you overhire, the management is constantly taxed with too many things to do, too many people to manage, too many people to hire. There's all sorts of new people in the company that haven't really become productive yet. The culture is hard to maintain because there's all these new people joining. It is hard. I mean, I worked for Sybase when we were in a high growth, stage, and it was very difficult. It was very fun and exciting, but it was very hard. So that's the way I feel about it. Like I said, I understand why companies do it, but I do oftentimes wonder, it raises the beta, it raises the risk level of the company very high when the company's growing at a very high rate.
I sometimes get criticized for having a lot of sympathy for CEOs because CEOs are ultimately in those situations not in charge. I mean, they are in charge,
Right.
but there's a lot of external pressure on them to make decisions that will get those short-term growth gains. And the idea, this Pollyanna perception that, a great CEO will focus on 20 years from now. Well, a realistic CEO will know that they're probably not going to be there in 20 years if they don't get the quarterly results now. And so it almost seems like the incentive structure of public institutions is broken. It doesn't quite make as much sense as it could.
Well, I mean, I actually think, I'm not sure I see it that way. I think because the stock market is so performance driven, we end up with a really dynamic economy. I mean, the United States economy is still the fastest growing economy in the world. And part of it is because we have this dog eat dog stock market orientation. I mean, underperforming companies disappear really fast.
Yeah.
They get bought or they go away. I think the question is, if you want to be a CEO, are you ready for this? You can't do it forever. It's a hard job. And some CEOs are very patient and they convince Wall Street to just stop asking me tough questions. We're going to do it the way we're going to do it. And, investors will eventually get it and they'll go along with the story. But I think this is kind of the cool thing about the United States. Relative to other countries, we visit a lot of countries and we visit a lot of companies in other countries. It's interesting to me when I go to the Nordic countries or the Northern Europe, nobody knows who the CEOs are. They're not celebrities. They're operations people. They run the company really, really well. They don't stand up and get on CNBC all the time and spout off about how great they are. They're not rewarded for that. Some of those companies are great companies too. This isn't the only way to run a country. It just happens to be the way the United States operates.
And the work-life balance for those employees is a very different experience at the front lines too, right?
Yeah, those are countries where education is highly valued, work-life balance is highly valued. There's obviously sometimes a higher tax rate and other things, but and so those companies are more forgiving places to work. Listen, the United States is like a cowboy country in a lot of respects, and that's just the way it's grown. We're obviously reaching a stage of growth where we're not growing at the rate we were as a country, and a lot of the political debates between left and right are about these value trade-offs and what kind of an organization and culture do we want to have in this country.
You've talked about companies as mini countries.
You're reading everything I write, aren't
I'm
you?
obsessed with you. I've been following you for over a decade. I think you're like who I want to be when I grow up.
All right. Okay. Well.
Can you talk about that? I love that idea
Yeah.
too.
So, I'm not I don't have a background in org design or I didn't study culture in college, but what I observed from all these companies we work with is in some ways a very simple way to think about culture is think about a company as a society. So in every society, there are people that are highly educated, there are people that are undereducated. There's people that make a lot of money, there's people that don't make a lot of money. There's people that are really ambitious, there's people that aren't very ambitious. There's people that are really healthy, there's people that aren't very healthy. And we try to create a forgiving and sort of holistic society so we can all get along. You don't have to like everybody, but ideally, a well-running society works for everyone. That's kind of the way companies are too. It's especially now with a 4.1% unemployment rate, you can't replace people willy-nilly whenever they leave. So there is a lot of value of making the society work so that the decision making and the processes inside of the company work for as many people as possible. There will always be some people that just don't fit and they just want to leave. But the fewer of those people, the better. So one of the ways to think about DEI, for example, pay equity, employee experience, leadership, irresistible leadership, whatever we want to call it, is we're trying to make the society work as a whole. Just like in the real citizen society of our country, we want to grow. The country has a GDP, and we want to create new jobs and new opportunities for people. We want to do the same thing inside of our company, but we want to take care of the people that are sort of left behind a little bit. Good example of this is something that happens all the time. It's happening a lot in healthcare right now, where a company has an underperforming business or product. Intel's going through this, and they're just really struggling. This business has fallen behind. This product is out of date. We're losing money. We need to get rid of it. And of course, the stock market doesn't care what you do. Just get rid of it and turn the rest of the company into. But from a human society standpoint, that's very dysfunctional. Laying people off oftentimes threatens the people who remain. It reduces the productivity of the company. It changes the culture. So if you think about it as a society with an underperforming group in the society, you might behave differently than just lopping it off. Because in the real world, you can't lop it off.
Right.
It is part of your society.
Would that be like deportation?
Yeah.
The metaphor?
No, so the business counterpart to that is redeploying people,
Right.
redeveloping people, what we call career pathways, giving people opportunities to reinvent themselves, having faith in people and giving them a sense of confidence so that they will move to a new role and they won't feel threatened. Companies that do that perform very, very well over a long period of time. So that's this idea of society. You know, the first time I came up with that, I don't know if you happen to notice this when I first started talking about it, I had just met with IKEA, and the woman who was the head of HR at IKEA, who's since moved on, was explaining to me that IKEA, which is a very Swedish culture, she said, we have a very formulaic approach to the IKEA stores, but we're always looking at new ideas, new flavors of meatballs or whatever it may be. And she said, but the way it works is any store or any employee can come up with an idea. They present it to community groups we have of first-line people, not leaders, who talk about these ideas. They socialize the ideas across all of the stores. And if everybody agrees that we want to do this, then they do it.
That's like the holacracy.
Yeah, and it's really slow,
thing.
and it's really takes forever. She said, but what works about it is when we do it, we all do it.
Right.
There's no moving back. That's a sort of society, or it's sort of like the way the political system works in the United States. It's very messy, it's very slow, but eventually we come to some form of consensus. I was listening to her and I was thinking, there's a lot of lessons to be learned here in how to run a company that's a good company. And IKEA is a very successful company.
Jesper Brodin, CEO of IKEA, was the very first guest we had on the show.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
And what I was struck by with him was his commitment to doing the right thing and not just the profitable thing, which is the game that CEOs have to play. How much of the right thing do I have to do, and how will that affect the bottom line, right? And there are trends. So there's CSR, and then DEI, and now ESG, and now no longer ESG, right?
Right.
What happens with these trends? Why are these fads and not things that actually, what is going to stick? Is anything going to stick?
Yeah, I don't know. The three-letter acronyms are a little bit of an oddball thing. I don't know where ESG came from. It's kind of a weird combination. The ideas behind them are really important. Unfortunately, DEI developed a bad name. I don't know why, but I think it has to do with affirmative action, a lot of other reasons. Not everything in business can equate to profit and loss and revenue and customer count. There are a lot of reasons why companies succeed that have to do with internal human things. Like I know in our company, I feel like a lot of my role is oftentimes as the spiritual leader of why are we doing this? Because we get bogged down in all the things we're doing. And I'd like to remind people it's pretty obvious why we're doing this. And if you just remember that, all the complexities go away. That's not a business metric. You can't put a business
KPI
metric.
that.
No, there's no KPI on the mission of IKEA. There's no
Right.
KPI on the mission of whatever the company may be. And those things result in a discussion about human issues. Now, diversity in particular, I want to talk about that for a minute because I know you're interested in it. I grew up during the days of affirmative action. I had an African American boss in the 1970s when I was at IBM. IBM was very diverse. I mean, my branch manager is one of the best branch managers I ever worked for, was a Middle Eastern woman who was very young at IBM. And I'm sure affirmative action had a lot to do with what was going on there. And the company performed very, very well, and it was very inclusive, and it was really a cool company. In fact, a lot of people at IBM married each other. There was a lot of families created. It was a very, very high-performing company in the 80s. That issue, unfortunately, turned into, for some reason, a social mission by a bunch of people who wanted to turn DEI into a way to change society. That's not what it was. It was really a way of running a company. It was a way of making a company more successful and more effective and more inclusive and more high performing. And I think that's where it went haywire. Is we started to promote DEI like, we're going to change the way you think about the world. We're going to teach you about your internal biases and make you a better person. That's not what it was about. It was really about, helping the organization operate better and helping people be more respectful and appreciative of each other regardless of their differences. And that's still there. I mean, we do a lot of work on this. We've published quite a bit of research recently on it. And CEOs and heads of HR still believe in these ideas of inclusion and diversity and fair pay equity and whatever you want to call it, DEI, whatever acronym you come up with, because there are very few companies left that are not global, that don't have employees in different countries, that don't have highly diverse customer sets and highly diverse customer needs, that are having a hard time hiring and want to have a more inclusive hiring process. There are some very pragmatic reasons why a more inclusive environment results in a higher performing company. So I think these, what happens with these three-letter acronyms is investors or bloggers or magazines pick up on these things, and then they try to write stories about them, and we turn them into things bigger than they really needed to be. And then, of course, CEOs get kind of brought along on that journey. But that's kind of what I feel about it.
I wonder if the fame culture of CEOs in the US also complicates that story because it becomes political. They become the face of this movement or not, right?
Yeah, I mean, the CEO of Merck, I just forgot his name, was an African American. Kenneth Chenault, the CEO of American Express. I mean, a lot of the African American CEOs did the world a big favor by showing the white sort of Anglo-Saxon typical American leaders that it's okay to promote women, it's okay to promote minorities. And that was big when I was young in the 80s. I mean, that was big. I think we're just in a much more politically charged environment now where most CEOs are trying to stay out of that. They don't really want to get involved in those issues.
Right.
But there are still good business decisions. I mean, we just did a big study of Chevron. One of the reasons Chevron's is such a successful company is it's a very inclusive company. I mean, it won't be obvious from the outside. You think they're kind of an engineering-oriented oil company. They're a lot more than that. They're a very inclusive company too, and that's one of the reasons they've succeeded.
So I wasn't going to go here, but you said spiritual leader, so I'm going to go there. Okay. People who watch my show may know that I was a lifelong atheist, and then I had a sudden spiritual experience that turned me into a believer in 1 second. And yet I had no idea what I believed in necessarily because I had never been to church. So I joined seminary. I'm still doing my MDiv at Pacific School of Religion just around the corner. Okay. And I'm very interested in the role that spirituality has in business. And you just said that as a CEO, you see your role as the spiritual leader. And there are terms that make it seem, wait, don't say no yet. Think about, remember in high school, we used to talk about having team spirit?
Yeah.
Culture, to some extent, is a little bit like, what's your team spirit, right?
Right.
It's the spirit of the organization. When you add together all the things you described it as, the norms, the unwritten rules, those things. I wanted to talk about this more in business, and I get so much resistance. People say, oh no, we can't talk about that because of religious freedom, and don't talk about faith at work. You said we have to have faith that we're doing the right thing and it will lead to the right results. I think that could be a really great solution, but it feels like spirituality and religion have been so intertwined we can't go there.
Well, I think religion is just a little too touchy because there's so many different religions and opinions about religions. But to me, the spirituality of business, maybe I'm being more of an engineer, is what I love about business is it's the ultimate problem-solving puzzle of any that I've ever seen. When I was an engineer, I always liked to solve problems. And successful entrepreneurs, successful business executives are at their core really good problem solvers. They look at a market, an opportunity, a segment of the market, a technology, and they somehow think to themselves, there's a problem here we can solve. And if they do that well, and usually if they're successful, they have done that, they try to do more and more and more of this problem solving. And that is, to me, the fascinating part of business. The spiritual part of it is reminding yourself of why you're trying to solve that problem. And I think where companies go is, listen, I remember when Boeing, talking about Boeing, when I was a young guy, when the Boeing 707 was that was really the first commercial airliner, changed the way we travel, it changed the way we think about the world, it changed our perspectives on the nature of, everything we did was changed when we could suddenly jump on a plane and go to a different place. They were a part of that. There was a spiritual belief system at Boeing when I interviewed there that we're changing the world with our transportational technology. I don't know if they still have that.
Yeah.
So, in our case, I can get very spiritual about HR. I know a lot of HR people. I love these people and I respect them, and I know how hard their jobs are, and I know how complex their jobs are, and I know sometimes how difficult their jobs are. That's a sort of a spiritual thing for me. So what we're trying to do as business leaders is we're just trying to tap into these innate desires people have to help other people or add value. I think anybody that goes to work if you go work as a teacher, you obviously have this. If you go to work in the public sector, you probably have this, or you wouldn't work in the public sector. When you go to work for business, you think people just want to make money. No, that's not why they go to work in business. They want to find something about themselves that adds value to others through their work. And when they find that, they have a great career. And that's, in some sense, to me, the spirituality of business. I don't think, at least for me, it's religious.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's religious either. My TED Talk was called How to Get People to Give a Shit. And I think that's how.
Yeah.
And the greatest job I ever had, I really gave a shit about it, And I also think that what CEOs want is employees who give a shit. Because when they don't, they're disengaged, they're quiet quitters, right. They're just wasting space on the balance sheet.
Well, and the other role and responsibility you have as a business leader, CEO or manager or either, is helping people find something in their lives that inspires them. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of companies I talk to who they believe one of their missions as a company is not just to sell a bunch of stuff and make a bunch of money, but to help people in the company become more engaged and happy and successful in their personal lives. They actually believe that's part of their goal as a company. And that forces them to think all the time about what can we do for the employees so they in turn can do more for the business, which is really the formula that tends to be the best one. So there's a spirituality to that.
All right. So the opposite of spirituality, AI. Let's end on that note. You have an AI product. You're a technology guy. You have deep expertise in technology, not just HR technology, but generally. This OpenAI thing that you just mentioned, they moved away from their nonprofit board. They're now going to be for profit. That terrifies me. Are we doomed? What is the future of AI and businesses' role in ending the world or not?
Well, I'm not at all surprised about OpenAI doing this. I'm not sure why they were ever a nonprofit to begin with. It never made a lot of sense to me. I think that's a very natural, normal evolution for an organization that needs billions of dollars of compute capacity. I mean, they've got to get the money somewhere to run all these models. So I don't think they're evil. I think they just sort of probably never should have been a nonprofit in the first place. And I don't think AI is going to bite us and ruin the world. I don't get that. I don't buy it. I don't see what people are worried about. I'm pretty smart. I'm not an AI researcher. These are algorithms that learn from data and feedback, like the algorithms we've had in other respects. And I think the engineers working on this stuff are going to have plenty of opportunities to give us transparency, explainability, guide rails, and other, boundaries around these things getting out of control. I mean, look at the drones that are being used in Russia and Ukraine, and I mean, are those things evil? They're just machines that we're using. I mean, we're the ones that are evil. We're the ones that are shooting people, not the drones. So I don't see AI as evil. On the counterpart, I think AI is one of the most spectacular productivity tools I've ever seen. I lived through the word processor. No, the HP calculator.
Okay.
I had a slide rule in college. The word processor, the spreadsheet, the PC, the mainframe, the cloud, the mobile phone, the internet, Twitter, Facebook, and all that stuff. I think this is maybe the best productivity and tool of all of them.
But I don't think Mark Zuckerberg's evil, but he invented something that is affecting the mental health of the entire generation of young people that are addicted to social media now. There's perhaps unintended consequences of this rapid advancement of technology. Do you not fear some unintended?
Well, okay, so let's go back to the discussion about the United States economy. He is rewarded for revenue and profit. He has discovered that the best way to build revenue and profit is through advertising, and the best way to drive advertising is through the algorithms that get people to click on ads. Is that evil? That's his business model. I think it's up to the federal government, the Supreme Court, and the policymakers in Washington and in California and other places to decide if that is a good business model or not. Now, right now, big companies kind of run the United States. We have a lot of political influence by big companies, so those kinds of guardrails aren't really being used very much. I don't think he's an evil guy. I think he's a very creative guy. I think he's probably one of the most creative people we have in the tech industry. These glasses he's developing are going to be unbelievable. I doubt most CEOs want to be making value proposition decisions for society. That's not really easy for them to do when they have stock market investors and other people breathing down their neck. That's really more systemic to me. So I'm not blaming him for what happened. I do blame them for lying about whether they were stealing information back during the thing that happened in the UK where we found out they were stealing all this information and they weren't telling anybody about it. I think things like that should be punished. But I think it's up to the government to putting the guide rules around how we operate on whether businesses are doing things that are positive or negative.
Okay. Well, I have learned so much. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. The last question, my favorite. What is one thing that you don't get asked very often in these types of interviews that you wish you were asked more often?
I think the thing that maybe a lot of HR people don't know about me is I'm probably more of an entrepreneur than I am an analyst. I mean, I love being an analyst. I love doing the work that I do. I love the space that we're in. But the thing that I find the most fascinating is running our company. It is a really fascinatingly challenging thing for me to do. And I think it makes me a much better analyst because every problem that I talk to companies about is a problem I have faced personally. And the reason we got involved with AI is I didn't want to be out there telling people about AI if I didn't know anything about it.
Right.
So we just jumped into it with both feet, and we are learning as fast as we can. So I think the question, to answer what you asked is, what do you really spend your time doing? And I would say I probably spend more time thinking about our company than I do about the work.
Yeah.
But it ebbs and flows, and I have a wonderful management team, and Bill is just amazing. I mean, I have some really great leaders who work with me and keep the company running so I don't have to deal with it every single issue. And I think for people that are in HR who might be listening to this video, the same thing goes for you. You should be spending time in the business, not doing HR, getting to know what their issues really are, and that will make you better as an HR person. I don't think you can possibly totally sympathize with what managers and employees are going through if you've never worked in their shoes.
Yeah.
So that's my counterpart sort of story of what I do for a living.
I think that's why a lot of HR people get marginalized, is because the business leaders can see that they're not putting themselves in their shoes and they're just so solely focused on HR. It feels out of touch with reality. The two have to meet.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the beginning of how did you get into HR?
Yeah.
And a lot of people went into HR because they didn't want to be in business.
Yeah, I'm a people person.
Right, and I don't think that's going to work. I think over time that's going to get in your way.
Can you tell us about Galileo? You have a new release coming out.
Yeah, so by the time this video comes out, it'll be launched. So Galileo is the culmination of 25 years really of work, all the research and maturity models and case studies and vendor work and benchmarking and stuff we've done. We've put it into this, absolutely spectacular platform for anybody in HR, any consultant, any vendor to find and learn and analyze information and get help with their job in a really incredible way using all the features of generative AI. And we've, to me, it's an interesting, exercise for us because it's changing our business model too. We spend a lot of time writing and editing and doing graphics and creating PDFs and building websites and trying to teach people show people where things are. And I never feel like people really find everything and kind of. This thing is the culmination of my brain and all the brains that have ever worked in our organization in a really, really useful form. So we're going to be promoting it. The new version is called Galileo Professional for individuals. We've been selling it to corporations. And I'm just really excited about it. So, I hope everybody who's listening to this has checked it out.
Where do I go to check it out?
joshbersin.com/Galileo. It's all there.
All right. Lovely. And if people want to follow you, you also have a podcast. I listen to every episode. So what is your podcast called?
The Josh Bersin Company podcast. There's two channels. There's the channel of me, and then there's a channel of all sorts of what we call What Works case studies. So we interview 2 or 3 companies and vendors every week, and so we're building a whole bunch of just examples and stories. So you can just listen to that and see, what's going on in different domains of HR and business.
Beautiful. Josh Bersin, thank you so much for letting me come to your home and interview you and fangirl out. I've been a huge fan of yours for a long time, and this has been just a total joy.
Thank you, Jessica.